Welcome to New News. We are looking at a landmark decision that has sent shockwaves from the halls of justice in Washington, D.C. to the historic campus of Harvard University. A federal court has delivered a decisive ruling in a high-stakes legal battle pitting Harvard against the executive power of the previous administration. The case revolved around a staggering sum of money, $2 billion. This was not a simple budgetary dispute. It was a fundamental conflict over the limits of presidential authority and the financial lifeline of higher education. The court's judgment has declared the Trump administration acted unlawfully, setting the stage for consequences that extend far beyond Harvard Yard. This is a story about power, money, principles. The core of the dispute was the administration's move to block congressionally approved funds designated for the university. An unprecedented action against a single institution on such a massive scale. The funds were part of a broader federal research and development initiative passed by Congress, and were abruptly frozen. The administration cited concerns over the university's political leanings and what it termed ideological misuse of federal money. This move was seen by many as a direct assault on academic freedom. It raised critical questions. Could a sitting president use federal funding to penalize perceived political adversaries? The court has now provided a firm answer. The legal showdown captivated legal scholars and university administrators nationwide. Harvard argued the administration overstepped constitutional authority. They said the executive cannot unilaterally defy Congress, which holds the power of the purse. The university's lawyers built their case on separation of powers. They argued that once funds are appropriated for a specific purpose, the president cannot withhold them for political reasons. The courtroom drama tested checks and balances, and the verdict reinforces those pillars. The ruling, handed down today, September 4, 2025, marks the culmination of the fight. Judge Allison Burroughs of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia issued a scathing opinion. She found the actions were an overreach, a violation of the Administrative Procedure Act, and of foundational constitutional principles. To fully understand the gravity of this case, we must look closely at the money involved. The $2 billion were not a gift or a simple grant. These funds were part of a multi-year federal allocation known as the American Innovation and Research Act, which Congress had passed with bipartisan support. The legislation was designed to fund cutting-edge research in critical fields like quantum computing, biotechnology, renewable energy, across several leading U.S. universities. Harvard, with its extensive research infrastructure and world-renowned faculty, was slated to be a major recipient. The funds were specifically earmarked for the construction of new laboratories, hiring of specialized researchers, launch of long-term scientific projects. The Trump administration's action to halt these funds was sudden and targeted. U.S. Congress, blocked by the Trump administration, Harvard. In a series of executive orders directives from the Office of Management and Budget, the administration placed a complete freeze on the disbursement of the allocated money specifically to Harvard. The official justification was a newly announced federal funding accountability review. This review, the administration claimed, was necessary to ensure that taxpayer dollars were not supporting research or academic programs that promoted un-American or radical ideologies. In her written decision, Judge Allison Burroughs provided a thorough and forceful dismantling of the Trump administration's legal arguments. She declared the withholding of the $2 billion to be an unlawful abuse of executive power. Her ruling centered on two key legal principles. First, she addressed the constitutional separation of powers. Judge Allison Burroughs affirmed that while the executive branch is responsible for implementing the law, it cannot unilaterally usurp the legislative branch's fundamental authority to appropriate funds. Congress, she wrote, had clearly and legally allocated the money to Harvard for specific research purposes, and the president did not have the authority to simply nullify that legislative act through an executive order. The judge's reasoning was meticulous. She explained that the administration's actions amounted to an impoundment of funds, a practice that Congress had explicitly limited through the Impoundment Control Act of 1974. This law was passed in the wake of the Nixon administration's similar attempts to withhold funds for programs it opposed. Judge Allison Burroughs' ruling drew a direct parallel, stating that the actual administration was attempting to revive a level of executive discretion that the law had long since forbidden. Her decision effectively stated that a president cannot use the budget as a personal veto pen to defund specific projects or institutions that have already been approved by the legislative branch of government. Furthermore, Judge Allison Burroughs' opinion heavily criticized the justification provided by the administration. She found the Federal Funding Accountability Review to be a pretext, a thinly veiled excuse for a politically motivated action. Her ruling noted the complete lack of established criteria, the arbitrary application of the review solely to Harvard, and the absence of any due process afforded to the university. She wrote, "The government has failed to provide a coherent or rational basis for its decision." This part of the ruling was particularly significant, as it moved beyond the constitutional argument about the separation of powers and delved into the arbitrary and capricious nature of the executive action itself, which violates the Administrative Procedure Act. Ultimately, the judge concluded that the administration's freeze on the funds was illegal and ordered the government to release the money to Harvard University without further delay. Her decision serves as a powerful legal precedent. It reinforces the idea that the executive branch must operate within the boundaries set by law and the Constitution. It cannot invent new reasons to block funds appropriated by Congress, especially when those reasons appear to be based on political animosity or ideological disagreement. The ruling is a firm statement that the rule of law prevails over the arbitrary exercise of power, a principle that lies at the very heart of the American legal system. The decision was unequivocal, a clear victory for Harvard University, but the implications are broader, potentially creating a protective legal shield for all federally funded universities. We are left to analyze what this means for the future relationship between government and academia. Critics immediately pointed out that no other university receiving funds under the same act was subjected to such a freeze. The action was exclusively aimed at Harvard, an institution that had frequently been a target of political rhetoric from the president. This selective targeting weakened the administration's claim of a broad policy-based review. It led Harvard's legal team to argue that the freeze was not about fiscal responsibility at all, but was instead an arbitrary and capricious act of political retribution, designed to punish an institution for its perceived liberal bias. The government's legal team argued that the president had inherent executive authority to oversee the spending of federal funds. This landmark ruling has immediate and profound implications for Harvard, but its true significance extends to every college and university in the United States. For Harvard, the decision means the restoration of $2 billion in critical research funding. This will allow the university to move forward with deferred projects, rehire researchers who were in limbo, and reaffirm its status as a global leader in science and technology. The victory is not just financial, it is also a vindication of the university's principled stand against what it saw as an existential threat to its independence. It sends a message that academic institutions can and should defend themselves against political overreach. Beyond Harvard, the precedent set by this case creates a protective buffer for all of higher education. Many universities, both public and private, depend heavily on federal grants for their research programs. The fear that this funding could be jeopardized by political whims has been a growing concern in recent years. This ruling provides a powerful legal shield. It establishes that the government cannot selectively defund an institution based on the content of its curriculum, the political speech of its faculty, or its perceived ideological stance. This is a crucial victory for the principle of academic freedom, which posits that universities must be free from censorship or retaliation to fulfill their mission of pursuing knowledge. The decision clarifies the rules of engagement between the government and academia. It reaffirms that the relationship should be based on merits, such as the quality of research proposals and the capacity to achieve scientific goals, rather than on political alignment.